Kitab al-Salah, and then by that time we'll stop and we'll be away for a while. Inshallah, we'll see what to do when I get back. Inshallah. Kitab al-Salah. Right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We were with taking Kitab al-Salah. Inshallah, today we're moving on to a new chapter, and that is called Babu Sujud Sahu. Okay? Sujud from Sajda. Sahu is when a person makes a mistake. Now, what you've got to remember before getting into the chapter, a few things. There's certain mistakes that a person makes in Salah that they cannot be made up by just making sujood sahu. You have to do the actual action. So, for example, pillars of salah. If a person, instead of reading, let's say Asr is 4 rak'at, and they only read one, and they say, in the first rak'ah I'll sit and I'll make sujood sahu, that will cover the other 3 rak'at. We'll say here it doesn't work. Sujood sahu doesn't compensate for what you missed, because what you've missed are pillars in salah. Okay, so as we mentioned before, there's certain things which are pillars, arkan in salah. Then there's wajibat in the Hanafi madhab. So wajib is a little bit less than a rukn. However, this wajib, a lot of them can be made up by carrying out sujood sahu. And then there's some sunnah or some nawafil, some sunan, that they say you must make up with sujood sahu. So that's number one. Number two is that sujood sahu, what is it? It's 2 extra sajdas, okay? A person makes at the end of their salah, so in the last sitting. 2 extra sajdas a person makes to compensate for any mistake they may have made in the salah. Then they tell you the types of mistakes that can be compensated. Now, the different madhahib have different ways to make the sajda to sahu. Some madhahib say, like the Hanafi madhab as you take, is a person is sitting in the last sitting. After reading tashahud, they make salam to one side, they make their 2 sajdas, and then they get back up, meaning they sit back into tashahud and they read their dua as normal. So if you look at it, they did make 1 salam, but the actual sajda to sahu was in the salah. And then other madhahib, where you read all the du'as, so you read your tashahhud, salah ala nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you make your du'a, then you make sajda to sahu before you make the salam. So you say Allahu Akbar, make 2 sajdas, and as you get back, then as soon as you sit, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And there's other madhahib way, sajda to sahu can be made before the salam, before the 2 salams, as well as after the 2 salams. So let's say a person has finished the dua, then they said Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and then they make the sajda. So many different ways of performing this sajda to sahu. Currently we're taking the Hanafi madhab, and inshallah later on you'll take all the other madhahib. So in the Hanafi madhab, when you read through the books, they'll tell you that this sajda to sahu is made, I don't want to confuse you, so I'll word it differently. This sajda to sahu is made in the last sitting after a person reads tashahud. Okay? What's tashahud? At-tahiyyatu lillah. Okay? When they reach the end, then they say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to one side only. Then they make sajda. Allahu Akbar, sajda. Allahu Akbar. They get up again like they're sitting. Allahu Akbar, second sajda. Then Allahu Akbar. That is the sajda to sahu done, and then they carry on the dua again. So they read the tashahud again, and they read the salah ala nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the dua, and then they make salam. Okay, so that's the way of performing it in the Hanafi madhab. When does a person perform the sajda to sahu? They start giving you different scenarios and different times when a person may need to perform this sajda. The first is, they say, if he increases, okay, and does an extra action, which is originally an action of salah, however, he's done an extra one of it. So, for example, instead of making one ruku, he makes two rukus. Okay. So, for example, a person goes down and say Allahu Akbar. Subhan Rabbiyal Azim, Subhan Rabbiyal Azim, Subhan Rabbiyal Azim, Sami Allahu liman hamida. They forget and they make a second ruku. Or for sajda, they make three sajdas, for example. This is one place. So whenever a person increases in the salah. Now they're not talking about an action that's not part of salah. So let's say if a person raises their hand up like this, or they start shouting, etc. All those are all af'al which are outside salah. This they're talking about an action which is originally part of the salah, but it doesn't belong in that position. So if a person had to increase any action or any act that's originally from the salah, but it doesn't belong there, he would need to make sajdatul sahu at the end of his salah. That's number one. Number two is they say that there's certain sunnah that if a person leaves, okay, if a person leaves these sunnah, then uh, he would have to make sajdatul sahu. Okay. Number three is when it comes to Surah Al-Fatiha. Surah Al-Fatiha, again, the Hanafi madhab, it's not a pillar of salah. Okay. But let's say a person can read it and they leave it. They call it from the wajibat of salah. Person can read it and they leave it when they're reading alone. Then they make sajdatul sahu for leaving that Fatiha. So the masail we took before with regards to Surah Al-Fatiha is the salah counted in the first place or not? Let's say a person's reading alone. Here they're telling you the person leaves Surah Al-Fatiha because he's left or it's equivalent to a wajib. Number four is if a person leaves qunut. So Hanafi madhab in witr, they're reading qunut. If a person had to leave that qunut, he would make it up by making sajdatul sahu. Number five is if a person had to forget to read tashahud. Tahiyyatu lillah. Okay. And they'll come into more detail when it comes to the tashahud, either reciting the actual tashahud, if forgot, or in a salah where there's two sittings. So for example, it's 4 rak'at, you sit after 2 and then you sit after 4. Let's say a person forgot to sit after 2. What do they do? Inshallah, that will come. And then they mention if he had to recite loudly in a salah that's supposed to be read softly, or he had to read softly in a salah that's supposed to be read loudly. So, for example, the Imam is leading Asr or Dhuhr, and he starts reading loudly, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And then he remembers, as long as he's read a portion or a bit, they're not talking about one word. So sometimes you hear the Imam reciting, for example, he's reading and says, Sirat al-Mustaqim. That's he's still quiet. Okay. So they're saying if a person reads loudly in a place where they're supposed to be reading softly, the Imam, or softly in a place where they're supposed to be reading loudly, then they go on to a few masail with regards to the Imam. Some of these masail they're still going to go in depth, and that we'll take on Friday. We'll finish Sujood al-Sahw, inshallah. They then tell you that a person who's performing their salah, again, as we've taken, either they are the Imam or they following the Imam or they reading alone. Now, all that we took is applicable to the person reading alone as well as applicable to the Imam. As for the person reading behind, okay, this is the person behind the Imam. If his Imam makes sajdatul sahu, he must follow him. Okay? So if the Imam makes sajdatul sahu, he must follow him. Okay? That's one. Two is, if he had to make a mistake, okay, while he's behind the Imam, he doesn't have to make sajdatul sahu. Why? Because he's a follower. The Imam is the original. So the Imam's salah, the correctness of it suffices even if he's made a mistake. And that could be, for example, he forgot to read at-tahiyyat, or he made a minor mistake, for example. He never read his qunut, etc. As long as the Imam Salah, or he didn't read his Sunnah, he didn't say Subhana Rabbi al 3 times, for example. As long as the Imam has done it, then his is correct. Okay? And this is different to Masbuk. Masbuk is a person who he missed some raka'at behind the Imam. So after the Imam made salam, okay, this person is no longer a follower. Now, if he had to make a mistake while he's catching up his salah alone, he'll come to this, so he'll have to make his things. You understood? And this is simple. The Imam, the person reading alone, all these rules apply. As for the person behind the Imam, if the Imam made a mistake or the Imam had to make sujood sahwi, follows him. And if the Imam, if he had to make a mistake, then the Imam's correctness of his salah suffices for him. He doesn't have to make sujood sahwi. And there's a lot more masail when it comes to sujood sahwi, and inshallah we'll take them. For example, a person is doubting, a person forgets, a person is thinking in the second rak'ah as they're getting up to the third, they forgot to sit. Are they closer to the sitting position or closer to the standing position? If they're close to the sitting position, what do they do?